The folder was already prepared. My name was signed at the bottom, and I knew immediately it was not my handwriting. My daughter sat across from me looking relieved, like she had finally finished something she had been planning for a long time. I asked for copies of everything, thanked the administrator, and walked out to the parking lot. What Amanda did not know was that I had just started reading. That afternoon had started simply enough. Then Amanda said something I have not forgotten. She leaned forward slightly and said, "Mom, you are living alone in a 4-bedroom house, and that is not really fair to anyone anymore, not even to you." I remember the word anyone, not you, not us, anyone. Like my living in my own home was somehow an inconvenience the whole world had been quietly absorbing. My name is Ashley Baker. I am 74 years old, and I live in the same house in Ohio that Daniel and I bought when we were barely in our 30s. The maple tree in the front yard was about waist high when we planted it. Now its branches spread over half the driveway. Daniel died 3 years ago, and some mornings I still reach for a second coffee mug out of habit before I remember. Grief does not disappear. It just gets quieter, like a radio you have stopped trying to turn off. After Daniel passed, I made myself a promise. I would keep living, not just maintaining. I drove myself everywhere. I paid my own bills, balanced my own checkbook, climbed the step stool when a bulb needed changing. Every Wednesday, I volunteered at the community library handling inventory records. Every Thursday, I went to book club. I liked knowing where my days belonged. Most people in my life respected that. Amanda did too, at least at first. She started coming around more after the funeral, and I welcomed it. She brought groceries, helped schedule appointments, sometimes showed up after work with takeout and stories about her day. It felt like love, and I think most of it was. That is what made everything harder to see. Have you ever had someone be kind to you in ways that slowly felt less like kindness and more like management? Looking back, I think that is exactly what was happening, but slowly enough that I kept explaining it away. She made a comment at the pharmacy once, laughing to the cashier, that her mother was getting forgetful. I smiled along. A few weeks later, she told a neighbor she worried about me being alone. Then the word confused started coming up in conversations about me. Then she said I repeated myself. Each comment was small, but small things in the same spot start to leave a mark. I noticed, and then I talked myself out of noticing because she was my daughter, and I did not want to believe she was building a story that was not true. My granddaughter Julia never treated me that way. She was 15 then, tall and a little funny in the way teenagers get when they are almost smart enough to know everything. She sat at my kitchen table and ate cookies and told me about school and actually listened when I talked back. About 6 weeks before everything came apart, she spent a Saturday with me planting flowers along the porch railing. At some point late in the afternoon, she went quiet for a moment, then looked up and said, "Grandma, did you know Mom has a folder on her laptop called House Transition?" I asked her what was in it. She shrugged and said she didn't know. She had just seen the name when she borrowed the computer for homework. She didn't think anything of it. I almost didn't either. Almost the visit to the assisted living facility was Amanda's idea. "Just a tour," she said, "just so we know what's out there." I had no reason to say no. The building was pleasant enough, fresh paint and flower beds, and a grand piano in the lobby that nobody was playing. It all felt routine right up until we sat down in the administrator's office, and she began talking about move-in timelines. I remember thinking I must have misheard her. Then the folder appeared. I did not argue. I asked for copies of every document, waited while she made them, thanked her, and walked out. Amanda called after me in the parking lot and I kept walking. The papers were heavy against my side in a way that had nothing to do with their actual weight. That night, I spread everything across the kitchen table under the lamp, Daniel. and I used to argue by the one with the slightly yellowed shade we kept meaning to replace. My coffee went cold before I touched it. I found the cognitive evaluation about halfway through the packet, clipped separately from the rest. According to the report, I was experiencing measurable memory decline, poor financial judgment, and indicators consistent with early dementia. I read it 3 times, not because I believed it, but because I could not understand how a document like that could exist with my name on it. Then I found the date. The evaluation had supposedly been conducted on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks earlier. I knew exactly where I was that day. Book club, third Tuesday of every month, library meeting room. Martha Jennings had brought lemon cookies. Frank Peterson had spent 20 minutes complaining that the author cheated by introducing a major suspect in the final chapter. There were at least 12 of us there, and I stayed until almost 5. No one had come to my house. No nurse had evaluated anything. And the name on the report, Carol Jensen, meant nothing to me at all. I said it out loud just to test it. Nothing. I got up and walked to the small desk in the hallway where I kept bills and appointment cards. The second drawer was slightly open. I am particular about that drawer. I close it completely every time because the humidity makes it stick if you leave it cracked. It was open maybe 2 inches. I pulled it all the way out. Everything looked in order, mostly, but a bank envelope near the back had been resealed. I could see the faint outline of dried glue along the flap, uneven, the way it looks when someone opens something carefully and tries to put it back. I stood there holding that envelope for a long time. Someone had been in my house. Someone had been through my things. And I had handed Amanda a duplicate key 14 months earlier because she asked, and I had no reason then to say no. The next morning, I called an attorney named Sarah Mitchell. Her office was on the second floor of an older brick building downtown, the kind with a coffee maker on top of a filing cabinet and a waiting room chair with a tear in the armrest. That actually made me feel better. Sarah went through the paperwork without interrupting, asked a handful of clean, direct questions, and at the end told me there were enough inconsistencies to justify a closer look. She did not tell me everything would be fine. I appreciated that more than she probably knew. The next few weeks were slow. Phone calls, document requests, waiting. One afternoon, Sarah called while I was trimming dead blooms off the front planters and asked me to come in. She showed me electronic visit records from the facility, dates and timestamps, and staff check-in logs. Then she asked if I had noticed Amanda becoming unusually interested in my schedule over the past year. And just like that, things I had filed away as normal started rearranging themselves. Amanda insisting on coming to routine appointments, asking about my medications in detail when she already knew what I took, wanting duplicate keys, correcting me in front of people when I had not actually made a mistake. A comment at a diner 6 months before, something about how aging sneaks up before you're ready for it, that I had laughed off at the time. I was not laughing now. 4 days later, Sarah called again. I was out front deadheading roses, and I remember brushing dirt off my hands before I picked up, as if clean hands mattered for difficult conversations. When I got to her office, she had documents spread across her desk and let the silence sit before she spoke. Carol Jensen had never logged a check-in at my address on the date listed in the report. No visit record, no location verification, no entry authorization, nothing. The evaluation describing my confusion and memory decline had not been based on any in-person assessment at all. Over the following week, more came out. Amanda had been contacting senior care organizations for months, asking about guardianship processes, capacity reviews, protective supervision. The dates went back much further than I expected, long before the tour, long before I had any idea anything was happening. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, with all of it in front of me, listening to the rain against the windows, thinking about every key she had copied and every appointment she had attended, and every time she had told someone I was struggling. Sometimes the people closest to you build a case so slowly that you do not realize you are the subject until the verdict is already written. Sarah also found something else. Amanda's divorce 2 years earlier had been harder than she let on. Julia was starting to talk about colleges. Amanda's life had been contracting while everyone else's kept moving. I understood that in a way I wished I did not. Fear dressed up as control is still fear, but understanding where someone's pain comes from does not mean you accept what they do with it. The formal review took place 2 weeks later, senior services. A rectangular conference table, fluorescent lights, people with folders. Amanda sat across from me. She smiled when I walked in, that same measured smile, like she was still certain she knew how the afternoon would end. Sarah sat beside me, quiet and ready. Carol Jensen was there with a leather portfolio. A social worker explained the process. Sarah laid out the evidence without drama: book club attendance records, witness statements, library schedules, electronic visit logs. She did not raise her voice once. Amanda suggested there had been a scheduling mix-up. The social worker wrote it down. Then Sarah introduced the location verification records, and the room got noticeably still. The facility administrator studied the pages. Carol adjusted her glasses. Amanda stopped smiling. The social worker asked Carol directly whether he had personally evaluated me, conducted an in-home assessment, completed the report through her own observation. Carol hesitated. Then she said she had relied on information provided by family and acknowledged signing documentation without completing the required process. Nobody needed to say anything after that. The admission did the work itself. Would you have been able to stay quiet in that moment? Or would something in you have finally broken open? I have asked myself that many times since. I stayed quiet. I watched Amanda look down at the table. Someone I have loved every day of her life, sitting there while the story she had built came apart piece by piece. She eventually tried to explain herself, talked about safety and concern and wanting to help. Some of that was probably true. People rarely hurt someone they love for only one reason. But I hated, quietly and without apology, how much I still wanted one honest sentence instead of a paragraph of reasons. When the room went quiet, I looked at her and said the only thing I had left to say. You weren't protecting me. You were replacing my voice with your own. Nobody responded. There was not much left to add. The paperwork was invalidated. The competency findings were withdrawn. Amanda received no authority over my finances, my housing, or any of my decisions. The consequences were serious, and they were appropriate. The first thing I did when I got home that evening was change the locks. Not out of anger, just because it needed doing, and I wanted to be the one who did it. The locksmith finished just before dark and handed me 2 new keys. I held them both in my palm for a moment before putting one on my keychain and dropping the other in the kitchen drawer. The one that sticks when you leave it open. The months after were not easy or clean. Amanda and I spoke occasionally, carefully, the way you handle something still fragile. Julia kept coming on Saturdays. We baked. We sat on the porch. We talked about the colleges she was considering, and those afternoons held me together in ways I could not have explained to anyone. I went back to the library on Wednesdays. I planted tomatoes behind the garage. I drove wherever I wanted, whenever I wanted, without explaining myself to anyone. One Wednesday morning, I walked into the library, picked up the volunteer sign-in sheet, and wrote my name. Ashley Baker. I watched my own handwriting, the capital A leaning slightly right, the K that never fully closes, and I thought about that signature at the bottom of the blue folder, the one that had looked almost like me. Almost. There is a difference between almost and actually. And I had spent 74 years earning the right to know it. If this story stayed with you, there are more here about women who chose to hold on to what was theirs.